So I'd love to start with a sense of scale, because I don't know if people truly get a sense for how big a company ADP is. I read somewhere that you've just crossed the threshold of 1 million customers. Is that right?
Yeah, so ADP is an older company, 75 years, but 1 million clients, 1 million enterprise clients. Now, some of those clients are very small, and some of them are the biggest companies in the world. Some of the numbers are kind of astounding. So we pay in any given month about 40 million people around the world. We'll do benefits on people. We'll do their HR transactions, everything like that. But what we're known for is that payroll and taxes. And so it really comes down to moving money. So last year we moved about $3.2 trillion. And so the scale of all of this is kind of insane. And of course, ADP stands for automatic data processing. So it is about data, and data at a massive, massive scale.
And I read somewhere 16.5 billion in revenue in fiscal year 22.
Yeah, that's right. Last year we crossed the $16 billion revenue line. Wow. 60,000 people work at the company.
Wow. All right. Very impressive. So what does data mean in the context of ADP, and in particular the ADP cloud product, what data cloud product? What does that mean? What is that?
Yeah, so inside of ADP, we build a whole bunch of different applications, but part of the application suite is to build analytics and benchmarks and all these insights that we provide to our clients to tell them about how their people are doing. You know, what's the turnover rate right now versus turnover rate 6 months ago? And what do we project that turnover rate to be, or the time to fill, over the next few months? So we have a development team, actually it's part of my development team, that builds these types of applications. And the other side of that, though, is that we also enable a ton of our applications with machine learning capabilities. And so, I can't remember the number. I want to say it was something in the billions of logins to our mobile app every month. So our mobile app's the thing where, did I get paid? Do I clock in and out? So we have billions of interactions with that. And so we use that to train machine learning to make our applications more intelligent. And then those applications, people want to buy those. And so it becomes this nice cycle as we move forward.
So the benchmarking product, so you get the data across industries and geographies, and you presumably anonymize it. And
yeah, so we aggregate information from our clients and their pay, job titles, things like that. And they can opt out, but for the most part, all the clients opt in. So we've got about 950,000 clients in this database. And what we do is we collapse all that data down. So in any given month, right, those 40 million people, there's about 21 million job titles. We run some pretty sophisticated machine learning to boil that down to about 6,000 or now 7,000 key job categories. And then based on that, we build compensation benchmarks on those. So I can tell you what somebody makes who's a software engineer here in New York versus in Alpharetta versus San Juan, Puerto Rico, and we can do that at a high precision. And that's the type of benchmarks we build. So we've got a bunch of compensation benchmarks. We also have a bunch of benchmarks, again, about, if you're going to hire somebody, where's the talent? Where's the availability? And we know that, and we can provide that to our clients.
So then clients license the data. How do they consume those benchmarks?
Yeah, clients can consume the data in a lot of different ways. So we have a SaaS application that they can do it. So we have tens of thousands of clients who consume it through a SaaS application. They can also license the data directly. And so we have distribution partnerships, either through systems integrators or directly to clients. And we're on some of the data exchanges, like the AWS one or the Snowflake one, for example. And then we also have APIs. And so we have a lot of clients that will hit APIs and then access data from us via APIs. Now, all of that's permissioned by the consumers, but it's a really big thing that goes on.
So I'm obviously particularly fascinated by the machine learning aspect and the predictive aspect of this. So can you predict when somebody's going to quit?
Yeah, we do. So we can do that. I'm looking at a couple of people that work for me here. So yeah, we have predictive models on turnover. We have predictive models to tell you who's going to be a good hire, who's going to be a good fit for certain jobs. I have a model that I haven't released yet, but I'm really interested in who's going to be a good salesperson based on over commission achievement. And so, yeah, we have those things, and people use them all the time to help run their workforces.
And is it like a deep learning kind of model where you can't really tell which factor leads to that prediction?
We have a variety, just been around a bit. We have a variety of different models. Explainability is important for certain things. So I remember once somebody who's the CEO of one of the hyperscalers saying to me, well, that's conventional machine learning. I'm like, yeah, but I can explain it, right? So we do. We have work in the turnover predictor, for example, uses 57 attributes. Some of those attributes are internal data from companies, but some of it's external data. So, for example, commute patterns. So the commute patterns actually shift over time. So it's important we retrain this, right? Before COVID, after COVID, you have retrains on those models. Now, at the same time, we build transfer layers on top of large language models. And maybe we can't explain all of those at times, right? But we have a range of technologies and techniques that we use because what we're really trying to do is go solve a problem. We're not bound to any one technique or even any one database for that matter.
Yeah, and I don't know to which extent that's confidential or not, but like when you say LLMs, like the GPT-3s of the world, like you guys have started using those products into production, or you own?
Yeah, we're in full production on top of some of those large language models. We basically are building domain transfer layers on top that are specific to the HR industry, the HCM industry, because we have unique data and unique knowledge about that. And then we sprinkle in a few ontologies on top of that. So good old-fashioned graph databases and ontologies on top of that. Because, again, we're trying to solve problems by using the tools and technologies, bringing them together.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere in preparation for this that you had an ability to create ontologies automatically. Is that?
Yeah. So we have... we took a look at it. You and I know each other from years ago where we worked in ontologies. And the problem in ontologies is they're super powerful. The problem is they're super hard to build. So we took a look at it and we said, well, wait a second. Can we solve the classic attachment problem? In other words, can we have a very shallow top-level ontology, but have the data automatically be processed through machine learning and then attach to the top nodes and sort of become a self-organizing system? And so over the past couple of years, we built something we call the skills graph or skills cloud, which is essentially that, as opposed to other attempts at this. And skills is the hot topic in HR technology and recruiting and everything. Instead of having it all done by hand, it's 95% automated. And so as new skills come into the market, new job titles come into the market, they're realized, skills are attached, and then you get a massive graph that then you can navigate and build applications on top of. We can even tie the compensation data to it because the compensation ties to the graph. So I can tell you, for example, if a nurse gets a new certification, what's the incremental value of that to her paycheck over the next year? And so that's what we do, automated.
Great. But your job and your role is fascinating because so you're a chief data officer, but you also do a lot of product development. I guess I'll let you define what your role is, because chief data officer is a role that ultimately did not exist that many, as recently as 5 or 10 years ago, and there's different flavors. So tell us about your role.
Yeah, so my role is different. I'm the chief data officer of the corporation. I came up as product development, right? I started and I founded companies and everything else. And I ended up at Oracle, and then I ended up here. But what I know is product development. The chief data office actually became as an outgrowth of that, because in the course of us building the product, we ended up building a massive data platform. And then it made a lot of sense for us to expand the role to deal with all the other challenges that a company has of our size. The biggest being data security. Because of what we do, because that, we pay in the US, something like 18 or 20% of people, and then we do the taxes on another, similar size. Data security and data correctness, data currency, data freshness becomes the main value of the company. And so about a year ago, I was asked to step up and take a larger role, really define what a CDO is for ADP. A company called Automatic Data Processing started in Paterson, New Jersey, never had a chief data officer. And so first one going through this, we're defining it as we go. Solidly has that combination of offense and defense put together.
Great. I got so many follow-on questions to this, but let's keep going down the CDO and the organizational part of the discussion. Do you have teams? I guess what does data from an organizational perspective look like at ADP? Do you have a centralized organization? Do you have a decentralized organization? How does that work?
Yeah. So we practice a hub and spoke. So my core team, and I have a core team that builds data platforms, really think about them as the hub. But then we have development teams. In fact, one of the development teams is headquartered here around the world. And those development teams and those technology teams, but also it could be the finance team or our own HR team or our sales team, they're building their own data pieces, but they're doing it instead of as a set of separated systems, actually declaring semantics and attaching their data into the data platform. At the same time as they're building independent models, but then sharing models. So, a good example of that is benefit codes. Everybody gets benefits here. You have your medical benefits. Every company actually codes those differently. So one of the teams built a benefit code classifier that we advertise it on, and then other teams can use it. And so we have a bit of a data ecosystem, but also an API ecosystem or machine learning API or reasoner ecosystem across the company. And that's growing leaps and bounds. So when we started this, I said, hey, let's do a hub and spoke. My boss, Don Weinstein, said, hey, let's do a hub and spoke. So we had a hub, and my team was the first spoke, right? But we didn't know if we were going to have a lot of other spokes. But here we are, 14, 15 months later, and we have about 30 spokes. And so I think it's really an interesting study. I'm not a big writer, but if I was, I might write an article about it, about the nature of building something good, then it spreads, right? It's the same model as open source. If it's good, it'll spread. And, we've been blessed by getting to work with some great technology, and we recruit some great people, so it works out.
Yeah. And, there's been this ongoing discussion around the data mesh, right? And this idea of data products and is there some parallel to this?
Totally. So the declared semantics are the piece that we've taken from the data mesh and the responsibility for the data quality and the data freshness. So if a spoke is going to contribute their data, they got to stand behind it. They can't say, well, I put the data in, but this month we're not going to fill that column, right? That's a responsibility. The piece we didn't bring from the data mesh was the notion of federated query. Because the problem with federated query is the latency of the query is the worst performing member of the federated group, right? And so we still have a centralized data repository, particularly for analytics or machine learning or those types of things that aren't sub-second. But then the declared semantics are all federated. And the data governance is all federated.
Yeah, perfect segue. I was wondering if you could expand on data governance, because it sounds, I mean, that's the flip side of scale, is just getting everybody to just follow the same standards must be hard.
Yeah, if you want to put a bunch of accountants to sleep, talk about data governance. But it's so important, so very important. So, we do lineage, we do data quality rules, we do data freshness, quality of service. It's really a quality of service algorithm. And the business units or the technical teams are responsible for that governance. Now, it's a learning process, right? We have consultants. We're learning. We're using tool sets from, all the vendors you could imagine to try to get this.
Talk about this next.
Yeah, to get a view across the data. But it's a journey. It's a journey. But in the financial markets, if you put up, I can't remember the number, but essentially, if you put up an incorrect bond rating in the financial markets, it's like $10,000 fine, right? Per exposure. So they're very much into that. For us, we don't have, we're not bound by the same thing, but we don't want to screw up a single person's paycheck, right? That is like our goal. We don't want to mess with a single person's, if you get ripped off by $1, you're pissed, and your relationship with that client or with your employer falls down. We feel very responsible for that as a company. So that data governance and that correctness, we're on the far end of correctness, and so we take it very seriously.
And what about data access? I think you mentioned data security earlier. Like, how is that managed?
Yeah, so for data access, it's been an interesting journey for us. We've had to move ourselves into a couple of new startups, spin-outs of the NSA, to be able to really go with attribute-based access. We do have a strong...
What does that mean? What does that mean?
So we're really looking at describing more aspects about the person and the data and the intersection between the two to authorize access. It's not an absolute, yes, you have access to this source or not. It gets into the nature of the data and the nature of the person's role, and then the combination of those. And so we have a dynamic interpretation of that during the access of the query, okay? And it works for us. I don't know how scalable it will be for other organizations, but that way, for example, I can access certain types of data about tax payments, but I can't access what my peers make inside the HR thing. So we need a more flexible way of dealing with data that can actually be interpreted at runtime or during the latency of the query than sort of the straight hierarchies, role-based access control that's existed to date.
Switching to the tools of the trade and the stack and all of the, I mean, you guys seem to be a big Snowflake shop, or at least Snowflake seems very keen on telling that you're a big Snowflake shop.
Yeah. So I'll just go on record. We don't overly endorse any one vendor, okay? Because we got it all, right? But our cloud stack is we're proud of the fact that it's in AWS. I presented last year at reInvent about that. And it's been great for us in terms of growth. But on top of that, we build layers. So we use some of the Amazon data systems. We also use Databricks. We use Snowflake. And we use a few other vendors in terms of data lineage and security on top of those. Both Snowflake and Databricks have been great partners to us. We probably use them differently than both vendors expect, right?
In what way?
So, they're on this collision course.
Yep.
Right? But we use them differently. So we use Databricks as that data layer, and we use Snowflake to do very specialized analytical database workloads that it's very, very good at. And we have good relationships with both companies.
Great. And then, by all means, stop me for whatever is confidential or not. But I don't know, what would you use for BI? Are you a Tableau shop? Are you a Looker shop? Are you trying new things?
What do we use for BI? So, as you know, I have a background in BI, so I'm a little bit biased. But no, inside the company, we use Tableau. We also use Power BI quite a bit. But we also build our own BI system, right? And we have two flavors of it. So the one that we give to our clients, the SaaS application for people analytics, we've built that from ground up ourselves. Now, it runs on some commercial databases, but we've built that ourselves. We've also built our own pretty incredible reporting engine. So reporting, which is something that seems a little bit boring and everything, actually is the lifeblood of enterprise companies, right? So our clients use reporting more than you would. It's amazing. We couldn't get the performance characteristics that we wanted in a commercial.
What's reporting? Like people.
So reporting can be as simple as a payroll report, but it also could be a data extract that you send to a government authority, like in Paris, right? We have to in France. We pay something like 20 or 30% of the French population. Every month, we have to transmit documents to the French government that show for each one of our clients who's on staff, what the social responsibilities are, what the payments are they showing up for work? So you have all these reports. We actually have something in our system like 30,000 downstream systems. Fidelity, Blue Cross Blue Shield, they all get reports. And all the companies get reports. And so to build something at the scale to serve hundreds of thousands of clients, millions and millions of reports, we ended up building our own BI layer for reporting, just to be able to operate at the speeds that we needed.
That's very interesting. That's
it's not sexy.
Yeah, like a non-obvious part of the BI world that like not many people talk about. Okay,
yeah,
very interesting.
But and I should tell you, the people that work on that reporting tool are in Brazil and here in New York area, in New Jersey, and they love their work.
What about machine learning? Are you like a SageMaker shop, or like what do you use, or like a homegrown open source?
Yeah, so we spent a long time looking at different things. So we do some work in SageMaker. We don't want to put constraints on folks, but we do use an awful lot of ML flow for our ML ops. We do SageMaker work. We're working with this really interesting company called Robust Intelligence in California that's helping us with bias monitoring, compliance, supply chain attacks on machine learning, which is a scary, scary part of machine learning. Anybody can sit down and write pip install, and before you know it, you've got a corrupted library. And so we're working with a lot of different vendors to build an ML ops pipeline that works for us. Right.
Yeah. And what about, last question on the vendor front, like, I don't know, data quality, data lineage, any of the cool startups or more established companies in the mix?
Yeah, so this is the one that gets me. So Amit Walia and I are good buddies now. We went with Informatica, and the reason why we're on Informatica is very clear. As Spencer was saying, not everything is in the cloud. And unfortunately for startups, they're making decisions about where to build, and so they're building in the cloud. Informatica has built for the cloud. They've also built on-prem. And so they can help us with all the on-prem systems. We run data centers that are massive, right? And our data centers, we need to be able to connect to old sources. I need to connect to DB2. I need to connect to Oracle, and I need to connect to other systems. And so Informatica has solved our needs there.
Great. How does a startup work with you specifically, but you think, with your experience as both a startup person and a larger company exec, how does a startup work with ADP, and how does a startup work with a large company in general?
So when I was in startups, I'd go to these enterprises and be like, well, why aren't you buying my stuff? Right? It's got to be good. We tend to be a little bit slower at ADP on embracing all the startups. First of all, I probably get a phone call every hour from an enterprise BDR. And at a certain point, you just can't sort through them all. But when we do...
You get actual phone calls?
Actual phone calls. Yeah, I'll show you my phone right now. My LinkedIn is even a bigger joke, right? But what we tend to do is we tend to put you through the ringer in terms of POC. And we're actually looking for three things. Yeah, we want to make sure the technology works for sure. But we're actually more sensitive to who your company is and who you are than we are to the technology at times. So, there are 10 different ways to do anything. And we can find technology that can do that. But we're way more interested in the company and way more interested in the people in the company to who we're going to deal with, because we know we're one of the biggest companies in the world and we are going to put them through hell. And so we want to be together. And if that personal relationship's not there or that trust relationship's not there, the technology is not going to execute, right? Outages are part of our lives. It just is, right? AWS had an outage in December. Yeah, everybody gets on the phone and deals with it. And so we all have to be in this together. So the technology is important, but the relationship with sales is as important to us as the relationship with the CEO of the startup.
And do you, depending on the size of the startup, do you expect to have that relationship with the CEO primarily initially?
Yeah, it depends. I pretty much, at my level, need to have that CEO on speed dial. We don't use it often, but every so often we do. And that has to be a commitment from the CEO. I did the same, right? And guess what? My customers have me on speed dial. So somebody asked me before, how often do I speak to customers? And I speak to customers every week. Probably every other day I'm on the phone with a customer, whether they're a big Fortune 10 or whether they're a 5-person motorcycle shop. My best phone call recently was with a guy who runs a motorcycle shop in Pittsburgh. He told me exactly what was wrong with our software and exactly how to fix it. And he was right.
Since we're on the topic of startups and big companies, and that's very much your professional story, like any lessons learned or anything that surprised you transitioning from being a startup person to a large company exec?
Yeah, so I met Matt when I was in a startup, and he wasn't a startup. He wasn't a startup, and he had moved and sold, right? So there were two things that really surprised me. One was I wanted to understand scale, but I didn't understand the scale in terms of how fast things could be sold and have to be supported at massive things. So I can launch a product today and have 5,000 clients on it in a year. And so there's a scale factor of big companies that I was surprised at. But it's great. The opposite side of it, though, is you can do very innovative things in big companies, very, very innovative things, if you stay focused on wanting to innovate. And I've had, 3 phases of my career, but the past 10 years, 11 years being in Fortune 200 companies, I've gotten to do some really, really cool things. Some of the most cutting edge stuff in the industry, and the companies have embraced it as opposed to said, no, no, no. And that was the biggest surprise to me, that companies want to innovate, and they really do.
Great. One last question from me before I switch to questions from the group. And jumping around a little bit, when I was prepping for this, I read about something very cool that you are doing or spearheaded, which is in the AI Ethics Council.
Yeah. So, as I said, we deal with data about people, and we take it incredibly seriously. So when we decided to really push forward in our AI and data programs, back in 2019, we stood up a thing called the Data and AI Ethics Board. And we meet, we review projects, and we set policy for the company. It's something that isn't legislated or anything else, but it's something that we felt that's the right thing to do. And we deal with some really thorny issues, but it's been eye-opening as this field develops to keep in mind that we're building these systems for a reason. I got a buddy who used to work for me who's now running around with a couple of robot dogs, right? And he's even thinking about that, right? Like, how does he apply those? And so it's something that, if you're in a big company or even in a small company, sitting down, taking an hour a month and stepping back to think about what you're doing and why is super important.
And what does the council look like? Is that a group of people that get together and?
Yeah, we meet monthly. The council, we meet monthly. We have internal people. It's a little bit overweighted to lawyers, but, you know, they're ethical. But we have external people on that as well. We have industry experts. We invite external representation, people that aren't associated with the company except for the ethics board. Participate. They're under NDA. They see exactly what we're doing in terms of products. They see, and they have a voice and have an opinion as to what we do with our data and with our machine learning.
Great. Do we have questions right here?
Thank you, Jack. A question would be, suppose a startup's BDR calls your personal cell phone and is lucky enough to land a 30-minute meeting with you. What is something that founders or sales reps spend too much time on in that initial discussion? What's something they spend too little time on?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think they spend too much time educating us on what they think we don't know. At least in my team, they don't get the meeting if we didn't actually already know what they were doing. Right? So, I mean, I was on one the other day, and the person had to get to the next slide, and we were begging to stop. Right? And the second part, you know, like what do we want to know? We want to know a little bit about the journey, about why the company existed. Not what it's doing, but why, how it came apart. So like Spencer was talking about why they built, right? That's interesting to us because it gives us an indication about where they're going to go. And we're much more interested about where they're going to go as opposed to what they have today.
Thank you. How do you control for bias, like algorithmic bias? And two, a lot of companies are interested in diversity and inclusion these days, not only racial, but gender, regional, sexuality, a lot of them. And if you take data, current data, it doesn't show a lot of diversity in most sectors. So how do you advise them on diversity and inclusion if you're interested in those things?
Yeah, so it's a great question, right? Particularly because we work with people. What about diversity? So we kind of do it three things. So first of all, on that AI and data ethics board I talked about, we published our principles. And what we said is that we don't believe that bias doesn't exist. In fact, we believe it does exist. And so our role isn't to mitigate all bias, but our role is to at least measure it, understand it, and express it, and make sure that people understand if it's there and if it's not. And so if you look at some of the things that we've done in our people analytics around diversity, our dashboards, our diversity benchmarks, things like that, it's actually allowing people to see where the bias is existing in their company, not just in their hiring, but even their ability to advance people or pay equity or things like that. So that's the second thing, right? So, the second part is that we want to make sure that we're making people aware of it. The last bit is, in all of our systems, particularly the ones around talent, like hiring and things, we monitor. And so we'll train the system, we'll understand, we'll test it. So the EEOC has a thing called the test of means, and we actually use that internally to gauge our machine learning systems. And then we'll test and monitor for that. Can't say that they're always going to be perfect, but what we have is a commitment for people with eyeballs on it to check it, maintain it, and try to do the best thing. And that's the best thing that we can do with technology today.
All right, couple more. One here.
Hi, I'm interested in the mechanics of your machine learning system for evaluating the viability of a candidate, as I'm currently in a job search myself. So
you got a resume?
I do.
Okay, give it to me later.
Yeah. So my question is two-part. One is this the new ATS, applicant tracking system, or a supplement to it? And two, this what you've discovered in your model. Traditionally, the paradigm is academic pedigree and professional pedigree, but have you found other nuances that predict the success of a future candidate?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we package our algorithms in different ways. There's a set of APIs. Right now, they're in the ATS systems that we make available to our clients, right? So if you think about it, if we're paying 18% of the country, we're recruiting about 15 to 18% of the country as well through those systems, okay? Education's an interesting factor, and it's in our system, but skills turn out to be a much more interesting factor, as well as not job titles, but the nature of the job. Particularly, we get back to the diversity. Not a lot, a lot of people don't necessarily have the opportunity to go to that school or have that job, or that job title, but it doesn't mean they're not going to be successful in their career. The hardest thing, though, in understanding success is what do you measure and how do you say the definition of good? And that doesn't matter if it's a candidate relevancy application or any machine learning model. I've been doing this a long time. I struggle sometimes when a machine learning engineer, data scientist can't tell me what the definition of good is. So what's a good employee? The only one I can think of is a salesperson who exceeds quota at a faster exceeding quota compared to, their peers. That's an objective measure of good. Otherwise, you need to really work on it. So what we're really focused on for a lot of reasons right now are skills. And we think that those turn out to be the most indicative. That doesn't mean, by the way, on your resume tonight, to list 1,000 skills, because that's going to be the negative impact on you, okay?
Hi, Jack. So my question is related to big data. So when we talk about data, we always think about big data in general. So I just want to ask, how does a company as big as ADP leverage big data and technologies, and what is the significance of big data in ADP in general?
Well, think about how much data we're talking about, right? I remember when I first came out of graduate school in 1990, people were talking about this concept of a petabyte. They were talking about this concept of a terabyte. And the first project I did in big data was in 1992, studying 547 million passengers on airplanes. That's what it flew on a year. And we put that on a 2 terabyte drive, and we had to have it specially built and ordered for us. And today, exabytes of data is what we're moving around in our company. So I don't know how else to express it. It's just exploded. So.
All right, last question of the night. No pressure.
Hi. How are you dealing with contractual obligations to your clients for data privacy in light of derivative and downstream use cases, and even instances where you may not know that sensitive data is in existence?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's almost like two questions, right? There's contractual obligations, and then there's consumer rights to privacy, right? So in terms of contractual obligations, we allow our clients to, opt out. We're fully informed during the contracts. And so what their data is used for is declared right up front, what it could be used for, and they can opt out either of all of it or partial of it. So they can choose to opt out of benchmarking, for example, or they could choose to not use some of the services, okay? But that client contracts are not consumer privacy. So when we talk about that data and AI ethics board, the first thing we did after our bias statement is take a decision that we want to treat the employees of our clients as consumers. And so each employee has the ability to opt out. We actually have the ability to trace that through as well. We also have things like, for example, before we use our own aggregation rules, but we call it a 5 and 10, right? We won't give out data about in any aggregation unless there's 10 employees spread across 5 companies, because you don't want it to be identifiable. But we also have needs sometimes for people to get individual data. In that case, we need to have a positive opt-in from them with informed consumer permission. So we're very, very particular about ensuring that we're protecting the rights of the individual in that sense. Okay?
All right, super great. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.